Hello and welcome to Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's editor Joe Sparrow, and in this episode we're very happy to welcome the writer, journalist and broadcaster Jude Rogers to the podcast. And she's here to talk about the nature of modern music fandom and what it is that fans feel in their connection with their favourite artist. Now, Jude has just published a new book called The Sound of Being Human, which tells the story of what it feels like to be a music fan through a series of personal recollections and wider research framed around a bunch of classic songs. So what is this Focus podcast? Well, as you know, Music Ally provides an analysis-rich and contextual guide to the music business. And each of these Focus episodes analyzes one meaningful music business story at a time. This podcast is also designed to be quick. It should take about the same amount of time that Daniela DeVille, possibly not her real name, of the UK could hypothetically withstand having 700 concrete blocks broken on her body. That's because in 2013, 16 concrete blocks were placed on what I imagine is her incredibly muscular stomach and then smashed with a sledgehammer in 30 seconds. Now, talking of taking repeated punishment in the form of a series of punishing and apparently pointless blows to the self, anyone who has spent any time marketing music knows what a thankless task it can be at times. Now, it goes without saying that if you make or market music, you need to understand fans. And on the surface, this podcast episode may not seem to be your archetypal music industry podcast topic, but Jude Rogers' book exposes the human side of the industry that we can sometimes lose track of amongst all the discussion of marketing KPIs and so on. So we're going to discuss the nature of modern fandom with Jude in terms of engaging with those artists and what they want in return. Let's hop over and speak to Jude now. So, hello Jude. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thank you for asking me to come on.
A pleasure. Now, we're going to talk about what it is to be a fan from a fan's perspective, because you've written a book recently which really gets under the skin of what it is to be a fan, and from a very sort of personal perspective. But before we start, is to set the context for the whole conversation that follows, and it's a music question as opposed to a music business question, which is what is, and this relates to your book, I imagine, is your favourite piece of music,
or
one that you would pick out if you could only take one. I know it's tricky; it's deliberately tricky.
This changes obviously every minute. I was asked this a couple of weeks ago, and it was a song that's not in my book. Well, it's not written about at length in my book. Oh goodness.
You can keep it on brand if you like and pick one from the book.
Yeah, I should do that really. Kind of. The song I've been really loving again recently is Buffalo Stance and a Cherry. Instantly makes me happy. It's got everything a good pop song needs. Yeah.
Good, a great choice. I'll link to that as well beneath the podcast. Okay, let's move on to the book then. You've recently published this book, which is called The Sound of Being Human, to excellent reviews, I must say. And a quote from the book describes it as a book about music told through the lens of a life. It's a book about how songs can fundamentally shape the identities of people who respond to them. And it's about that, as I said before, that fan connection and feeling. Can you give us a brief overview of what that means in the context of the book and what you write about in it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You introduced me by saying, it's a book from a perspective of a fan. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's a whole life story of a fan who was a fan, when she was tiny and grew up to be, a music journalist. I wanted to write about being a music journalist through the perspective of being a fan as well, because I think of lots of music journalists. Yes, we have to be objective and critical and not get lost in our own personal likes and dislikes. But we all have become music journalists because we were music fans. I haven't met any music journalists. Maybe one or two. But I just, sneering about everything.
I won't push you to name names, but if you want to.
I won't name names. A couple of years ago, I could have stuck in this idea that, I really loved writing very personally about music and emotionally about music. And I'm somebody who obviously knows lots of music fans and geeks and journalists and people who work in the industry, but I also know people who love music who are not connected to the industry at all. And I can talk about my love of music to them in the same way as I can talk to, Nigel Reeve at Universal, because we have this shared set of references. We have a fan we loved or a song that takes us back to a certain time and place or whatever. So I thought it'd be really interesting to try and tell the story of my life through songs that have shaped it. And use those songs as springboards to answer questions about why music makes most of us respond to it so powerfully and deeply. So I start, with my first memory, which is of a song, Super Trooper by ABBA, in my grandma's kitchen, twin tub washing machine in the back. I talk about my dad, who was a big part of the book, who died when I was a little girl. The last thing he asked me to do before he went to hospital was to find out what was number one. So, and I didn't get to tell him, very sadly. But it says a lot about him, and it says a lot about me. This connection, we've shared that connection that day, and genetically just in me. But then I go through my life, how music sort of opens up our childhoods, how it, how when we're teenagers, our fandom gets, so intense, how it lets us meet other people, escape our ordinary lives in different. So that kind of fandom can take us so many different places. And I love exploring that connection between the artist and the fan.
Yeah, this is not an affiliate sales scheme here. So I'm recommending that our listeners buy the book purely based on its being very good. And if you have any interest in understanding the nature of a fan and what fans feel, which I think in the music industry is something that's easily forgotten, your book just using your experience as a human being, a music fan, to say this is how music makes you feel. Now, let's talk about fan. You've touched on it there, which is it arouses extremely strong emotions, whether you're a teenager or whether you're older as well. How do you, as someone looking at it from the perspective of someone who's worked as a music journalist for a very long time, has worked essentially in the music industry for all that period as well, and also as clearly as this book describes as a real fan and an understander of fans, how do you just define fandom, that connection, and what does it mean in a sort of social, like a personal sense, but in a sort of wider social sense for that individual as well?
I think it's a very, fandom at its most meaningful is this very intense connection between you and a person or set of people you don't know, but somehow they have constructed some melodies or written some lyrics or done this magical thing that has clicked with you. I talk about fandom in different ways in the book. I think socially, it's, fandom basically, this is both socially and personally. It kind of introduced me to, whole worlds of other possibilities, which was a very important thing for me when I was a little girl. My dad was, I was 5 when my dad died, and music after that became this real buoy or set of rungs, I say at one point in the book, to hold on to and climb up. It's the world that's around that song as well. So sometimes I could just hear a song and I would instantly want to be part of that world. Like the first song I remember after he died was Freedom by Wham, which is still one of my favorite songs. I love it. But then after that I saw their videos, and I got the idea of who George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley were, in quote marks, these beautiful coiffured friends who had fun and dropped their drinks into swimming pools and rode horses and did all this stuff. Fandom is something that is very intense and natural for a lot of us, I think, because we want to, as human beings, connect with other human beings. But it is something that can be, honed and polished and manipulated, as we all know as well. In some ways I wanted to investigate in the book some of the elements of fandom that were maybe not as linked to young girls. I to write about that. I wanted to write about how being a fan of Nena Cherry can make a young girl, just seeing her on Top of the Pops and seeing her live performance, and the kind of just the physicality of her and how natural it all seemed kind of made me want to learn about her world and made me want to share her song with friends. And I wanted to talk about, loving a band like REM, in my teenage years, this distinction between this girl from South Wales and this band from, Georgia, and how that worked. But yeah, I think fandom is it could be this really magical thing. And I really think, I hopefully get across in the book how, it's not this hysterical phase. It's this conversation. It's like this ongoing conversation between fans and artists, which obviously can be manipulated, in time sometimes improved or kind of and made better by the way record companies work around that. But yeah, kind of it's something that hasn't left me yet. Anyway,
yes, I can tell that.
It's still there.
Yeah, I can tell that from reading your book. But then modern day fandom, well, what do you think about this as a premise? That it's very sort of performative in a way, that you are seen to be supporting your favorite artist, and you're seen to be doing it as hard as you can to show that you are one of the biggest fans. How does modern day fandom compare with perhaps of the sort of TikTok social media era, compare with the fandom that existed before that? I'm not asking you to sort of say one is better than the other, but how does it compare in the sense of what it is to be a fan today and what the consequences are of that?
It's vastly different. I write about my teenage fandom of REM, and this is around the time of Automatic for the People. So this is 92, 93. So
which is a wonderful album. A great
yeah,
one
fantastic.
Course, yeah.
This is 1993 is when the World Wide Web came along, as we used to call it then. And so my fandom was from a completely pre-internet. Only at times it was me watching clips of Drive I taped off the chart show when my parents were out and my brothers again and again and again and again, just watching this video, trying to take it all in, trying to work out what it was all about, and looking at Michael Stipe, who I really fancied, and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, there was no way of me meeting like-minded fans. I bought music magazines, and that's how I felt I was in a world where I could share things. You knew there were people out there who shared the same things as you. You didn't necessarily know them. And yeah, that performative element. I worry about saying it's performative because this almost feels like a bit of an old fuddy-duddy. Yeah, it is performative. All social media is performative. But I have made friends. I have made connections through social media, and I think that I'm very jealous of young people today who have that ability to be able to just make networks of like-minded friends and fans. I think in the old days, it was a lot harder to find your own people. So I'm quite jealous of young people today. And I'm thinking of my 8-year-old growing up now. He's just getting into music, but he is fascinated with visual images of and being able to see these artists. And obviously that was the case, before. Of course, we wanted to see what they looked like and their artwork. That was massively important to fandom. But that's instantly accessible access to that now is such an important thing.
And just to jump in here, if you're finding this useful and you crave more of this kind of news and trusted analysis waiting for you in your inbox every morning, as well as access to all of our industry-leading reports, head on over to musically.com/subscribe. If you work for an indie label, you're an artist manager, you're an employee of a CMO or a publisher, you might be eligible for one of our sponsored complimentary subscriptions as well, which would be nice, wouldn't it? So head on over to musically.com/subscribe, find out more and get in touch. Okay, let's go back to Jude. Do you think that now one of the things that fans want is understanding a connection with the person, the artist, and what they stand for, or as much as they do the music and things around it? Do you think that social media has shifted the emphasis?
I always think about my early days of working at music magazines when I was at Word magazine, and it was this period when Lily Allen and Amy Winehouse came along, and they just were so, they were real people. They seemed to me like real people. They talked as if they hadn't had media training or had rejected media training. Amy Winehouse was just off the wall but very funny. As was Lily Allen, obviously different kind of backgrounds, both of them. But that felt like a real turning point for women, actually, and how they could present themselves. After that, you get, this search for, artists that are authentic, it seemed. From my journalist perspective, it seemed that record companies are trying to get artists to present themselves in this way that was yet unfiltered and unmedia trained, even though they may have been trained to seem unmedia trained, I don't know. And then when Adele came along, obviously that changed everything, I think, and I still, maybe not as much now, although I did really like Adele's recent record, that establishment of her personality and her humanity. And, when she sang Someone Like You on Jules Holland and cried near the end of it, it felt like, she was a real person doing these songs, and that had such ripples across the industry. Obviously, you have somebody like Ed Sheeran as well, who, you would in 1985 when I was a kid, you wouldn't have dropped him into smashes and gone, here's the next massive pop star. Kind of. He doesn't look like a pop star. He doesn't act like a pop star, but he makes some of the most pop records you've ever heard. And I think it's a big change. When I loved Michael Stipe, I loved the mystique of it. There are still artists that like FK Twigs. Is that somebody who came to mind? Somebody like it's all about the mystique. She does loads of interviews, but there's still this kind of weirdness and mystery around.
Artists, again, not everybody, but a lot of them are looking to foster that authenticity. Because if you get it right, fans feel like they know you. I guess the reason I'm asking you in a sort of comparative way is not because I'm trying to say, hey, the good old days versus now, but a lot of you've written about artists through time, and you've traced that change in your book. So if I think back to my childhood, I loved the Pet Shop Boys when I was about 10. Sheeran, I feel like I know more about Ed Sheeran than I do about Neil and Chris from the Pet Shop Boys. And I don't listen to Ed Sheeran's music. I just know it because it leaches through the internet and reaches me. So what does this mean from a fan perspective, do you think, when everything is sort of niched and delivered to fans directly, individually like this? You've got a community that perhaps exists online, and you exist as the little discrete molecule of a fan. There's a big difference there, isn't there, between shared experience, where you all watch the same TV show and see something and talk about it the next day, to ones that you experience sort of empowered. Is there something lost in that sort of communal sense of fandom?
I still think those things are really important, and it might not happen. Obviously we don't have Top of the Pops on a Thursday now, but we have when Glastonbury's on TV all weekend, or we have a band on Strictly. There are still those little links that are still very important to pushing artists. I think fans just have to be more active and creative about maybe sharing things or joining communities. They have to act upon them. It gives you the option, I guess, of if you're a person that just doesn't want to, and you just want to have that one-to-one connection with the act or artist, then you can have that. It's funny, I find, as a fan myself now, I still get, periods where I, become a big fan of somebody new. Like probably the last time that happened to me was last summer when I really got into Self-Esteem's album. I was just playing, I do this all the time again and again, going, oh my gosh, this is so great. And just what stuff to have in a song, and it's so messed up and weird, but so accessible. She's somebody who uses social media lots, and is very unfiltered. But I do get the sense that even though she's got fans everywhere, in that Instagram feed or in the worlds around her, there are connections being made. I've introduced her music to friends and fans, and I've met some people who are fans of hers, at gigs. And I still think that stuff exists. It might just seem a bit more impenetrable and overwhelming, actually.
Yes. Well, we all have to work harder to contribute these days. It feels you can't be purely a consumer. You've got to be a creator and disseminator and consumer at the same time, haven't you? That's how it works. So, Jude, thank you ever so much. The Sound of Being Human is available in all good bookstores, and I gather some of the big bad ones as well. But I'll put a link to beneath, and it is a great book. So, Jude Rogers, thank you very much for
thank you very much.
This podcast. And if you found that conversation useful, please share it on with someone who you think will get something out of it. And if you'd like to continue the conversation with me, why not? My email address is joe@musically.com. That's Joe, Joe, @musically.com. We've also got, don't forget, a free weekly email called The Knowledge, which rounds up bits and pieces of all the best stuff that we publish at Music Ally. And you can sign up and impress your friends. Links are in the description, as always. Well, that's it from me, Joe Sparrow, and thank you for joining us here on the Music Ally Focus podcast. And until next time, farewell.